or at least I started looking a lot more deeper into them, especially just watching old film from last year, even watching some spring stuff from early this year. They started last week. You know what's interesting about the Georgia Bulldogs? Now, here's what normally happens. It happened to Saban a lot too, is when we talk about college football teams, we normally just talk about, oh, well, Georgia, they recruited well. They got a lot of dudes. They're just reloading, and they're going to be really good. I think what we do for teams that have dynasties or are really good for long periods of time, from a national perspective, we break them down, but we don't really break them down. We say, oh, well, Georgia's going to be there. Georgia, Alabama's going to be there. Ohio State's going to be there. Guys, I got to admit something to you. I look at a team like Georgia and think to myself that I could see them possibly. Now, from a statistical standpoint, they're never going to be the top offense in the country. It's just not their style of play. They're going to go under center. They're going to run the football. Etienne being there is going to be a big deal for them. But the weapons that they have, the offensive line that they have, the running back core that they have, the quarterback that they have, I got to be real with you. I look at Georgia on paper and ask myself the honest question. From just a down in and down out, a play in and play out, or the Georgia Bulldogs, arguably one of, if not the best offense in the conference. Let me tell you why I say that and what I'm thinking. You bring in guys like Kobe Young. You bring in guys like Landon Humphrey from Vandy. So you're adding pieces on the outside. Now, the argument has been, and it's not a bad one, is that Georgia just hasn't necessarily been explosive enough on the outside at receiver, even though that Ladd McConkey runs a sub 4.4, 4.39, whatever it was. You have Brock Bowers, who's going to be probably a top 15 pick. But from a pure wide receiver standpoint, there have been some that have asked themselves if they're good enough there. Guys, I look at this team right now and say that they might have a pretty good squad with the weapons that Carson Beck, who we'll come back to and talk about a little bit more in depth here, has to play with. Look, Dylan Bell was a guy that I fell in love with. He's a do-it-all dude. I do think that if you put the dude in the backfield as a running back, the dude will make take lemons and make lemonade out of it, because he is one of the best overall athletes I think that they have on the team. The dude is special. He can play in the slot. He can be out wide. You can put him as an H-back. You can really do whatever you want with him. But Dom Lovett returns. Okay? Ra Thomas returns. You add in Landon Humphrey. You add in Colby Young. You add in some of the guys and the freshmen that you recruited. That's not a bad squad. Now, I don't know if they have a top tier, like bona fide number one. Like, I don't think they have a Malik Neighbors. I don't think they have a Marvin Harrison Jr., Roma Dunze. They don't need it. But what they do have are very reliable and really good weapons, especially now with a lot of those weapons being in the same system in year two with Mike Bobo and being with the same quarterback in year two in Carson Beck. I think you give a guy like Carson Beck a better running game, which is what he's going to have this year with Etienne coming in. We'll talk about that O-line in a minute. I got to be honest. I look at what, even with Oscar Delp, I look at the receiving core. I don't know if they're not one of the top more premier teams when it comes to just pure talent around Carson Beck. And people will look at Landon Humphrey and say, oh, man, that dude ain't that. I mean, he was at Vandy. He's not that good. Man, Dylan Bell, he's okay. He's above average. Well, Dom Lovett, who was really good, he didn't have a great year last year. Ra Thomas didn't have a great year last year. I would remind you that neither did guys like Brian Thomas the year before in 2022, and then he led the SEC in touchdowns. Jane Daniels didn't have a great year for some of you, and he won the Heisman. I just look at them and say, look, you're going into a year two with the same coordinator. You have the same voice. The reason I also look at these weapons and think that they're going to take the next step and be better than they were a year ago, it's for one main reason. It's Carson Beck in a year two. Carson Beck coming back is arguably the biggest thing for them because they're going to be good on both lines of scrimmage. They're going to be good in the secondary. They're going to be comparable in what they have with the weapons on the outside. You're going to get ATN, so you're going to have a good running game. We'll talk about their O-line in a minute. The reason that makes this all dangerous and why Georgia is going to be dangerous, in my opinion, is mainly due to the simple fact that Carson Beck might be the best quarterback in the country. Yes, I said it. Now, that gets a lot of pushback from a lot of people. But Dylan Bell, Dom Lovett, Rod Thomas, Landon Humphreys, Colby Young. I think of all five of those, there's going to be somebody, even with Delp, there's going to be somebody that breaks out of that pack that nobody's expecting. From a conference-wide thing, you know, when we talk about the best wide receivers in the conference returning, none of those guys really come up. None of them. But it's going to be interesting when we hit early October, early November, and you're saying, well, shit. Landon Humphreys has got 750 yards and 6 touchdowns. It's the Georgia way. They're not going to be the top premier dudes from a statistical standpoint. But statistics don't always tell the same story. You know, I hear a lot of you say sometimes, stats don't lie. The shit, they don't. We use a lot of them on the show. Stats do lie. Because when you play in and play out, I don't know if they're not overall better than they were a year ago. To be honest with you, I know that you're losing guys like Ced Van Pran. It's a massive loss. Ced Van Pran not being there at center is a massive loss. Mims not being there is a massive loss. But I tell you this every single offseason, or quote-unquote offseason. Teams that are senior-led normally, and guys that are, especially with a quarterback, returning in a second year in a new system, historically, they bode out well. I mean, the last 2 Heisman Trophy winners in the SEC, that's the scenario that it played out in. Ironically, both of them being at the, even with Devonta Smith. I forget about Devonta Smith in that COVID year. So 2 of the 3 SEC Heisman Trophy winners. Let's look at their offensive line. I know that there's a lot of question marks with guys leaving going to the draft. Don't blame you. I think it is a big question mark. But you have 4 classroom seniors, guys that have been there 4 years, 5 years plus, that will be along their offensive line. Xavier Truss at right tackle, I do think is going to be, what can you get for him? Can he take that next step? I know we saw him at times last year. Tate Ratledge, Jared Wilson, Dylan Fairchild, and then who's at left tackle with Ernest Green III. Left tackle, you're going to have to see who wins that job. I mean, we'll find out at a later date. I mean, we'll see. But you just have so much returning on offense, and in a second year with Mike Bobo, because I mean, you were top 10, top 15 offense last year, even statistically. I just don't know if you're not going to be there again, and it's not going to overall be better. We talked about them on defense. Okay. The same can be said from them on the defensive side of the ball. A lot of seniors, they get guys in the portal like Xavier McLeod. Okay, who's going to be a depth piece, a number 2 dude that they can rotate in and out there. That's where Georgia makes their bread, right? That's where Georgia makes their hay. It's where Georgia makes national title runs, okay? But I look at this. Ingram Dawkins Jr., Warren, Bryson, Xavier McLeod, just so many dudes returning. You have 4 senior defensive linemen. 4. They're arguably the most experienced team when it comes to age in the conference. I think it bodes well for them. All right.